So as the fever builds, Batman is already in the bag, retailers say, and if the movie's a hit or not may not even matter. Now, Batman will open in some 2,000 theaters nationwide this weekend, and considering all the money they spent on the hype, the movie producers are hoping that they too can scream, "Holy cow," that is, when the box office receipts are totaled.
In this video, we're going to treat the Tim Burton and Joel Schumacher Batman films as a unified motion picture anthology, as they were originally when released. I know that recently there's been some debate as to whether or not they take place in the same continuity, but we'll get to that later. We're going to be taking a look back at all four films, seeing how they did at the box office, adding some context, and putting them all into perspective when we adjust for inflation. This is a box office history of Batman, the motion picture anthology. Our first stop is the year 1989. 1989 was a year stuffed with sequels. Back to the Future Part 2, Lethal Weapon 2, Ghostbusters 2, The Karate Kid Part 3, Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, View to a Kill, you get it. Other notable films released that year included Dead Poets Society, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, When Harry Met Sally, Do the Right Thing, Field of Dreams, and of course, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Batman as a character was in an interesting place in 1989. The last time The Dark Knight had been seen in theaters was in 1966 in Batman the Movie, starring Adam West and Burt Ward.
Some days you just can't get rid of a bomb.
That film was released between the first and second seasons of the Batman TV series. That beloved series had a campy comedic tone which came to define Batman during that era, at least in live-action entertainment. On the comic side, the 80s had actually been a time of The Dark Knight becoming, well, darker. The Dark Knight Returns had released in 1986, and The Killing Joke was released in 1988. Both served as inspiration for Tim Burton, and The Dark Knight Returns would be a source of inspiration for other Batman directors such as Christopher Nolan and Zack Snyder. These comics, amongst others, renewed interest in a darker interpretation of Batman that would shed the campy tone of the 1960s TV series. After languishing in development hell for over a decade, Warner Bros. Finally found a director for its Batman film in Tim Burton, after the financial success of Burton's films Pee-wee's Big Adventure and Beetlejuice. Initially, the studio wanted a high-profile actor for the role, with Mel Gibson, Kevin Costner, Charlie Sheen, Tom Selleck, Bill Murray, Harrison Ford, Dennis Quaid, and Pierce Brosnan all being considered. Yes, you heard that right, Bill Murray. Imagine if he'd shown up in The Flash. Producer John Peters suggested Michael Keaton for the part after seeing his performance in the film Clean and Sober. Burton liked the idea of casting Keaton after working with him on Beetlejuice. For the Joker, Tim Curry, David Bowie, John Lithgow, Brad Dourif, Ray Liotta, and James Woods were all considered, but Jack Nicholson had been the studio's top choice for a while. Nicholson's deal for the movie was highly lucrative and included top billing on promotional materials and a cut of the film's earnings, including merchandise. It's estimated that Nicholson has made over $90 million from his role as the Joker. Before the movie was even released, it was facing backlash from fans who believed the Batman would be similar in tone to the 1960s TV series due to the casting of Michael Keaton as Batman. At the time, both Keaton and Burton were known for their more comedic work. In the months leading up to the film's release, Warner Bros. Launched a powerful marketing campaign that led to what became known as Batmania. It's estimated that over $750 million worth of merchandise was sold during the summer of Batman's release. When the film opened in theaters, reviews were generally mixed. Performances of both Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson were praised, as was the production design and overall visual style of the film. Criticisms included the film being too dark and the sidelining of its titular character for Jack Nicholson's Joker. But let's talk box office. 1989 was a record-breaking year at the box office. In May of that year, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade broke the record for biggest opening weekend domestically with $29.3 million. However, Indy's record was itself quickly broken by Ghostbusters 2, which released on June 16th to an ever so slightly higher $29.4 million domestic opening weekend. But even that record was held for just 1 week, because on June 23, 1989, Batman opened to $42.7 million in its domestic opening weekend. In its second weekend, it grossed $30 million domestically, which beat the record-breaking first weekend numbers of both Last Crusade and Ghostbusters 2. Batmania indeed. Batman would finish its run as the highest-grossing film of the year domestically. Worldwide, the top three films of the year were Back to the Future Part 2 in third place with a worldwide total of $332 million, Batman in second place with a worldwide total of $411 million, and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which managed to defeat The Dark Knight due to a stronger showing internationally, in first place with a worldwide total of $474 million. Batman remained the highest-grossing superhero movie of all time until Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man film in 2002, and it was the highest-grossing film based on a DC Comics character until The Dark Knight in 2008. Even after Batman finished its theatrical run, it's estimated that the film generated an extra $150 million in home video sales alone. Our next stop is 1992. Batman's success led to an immediate green light for a sequel. Batman Returns. Burton took some convincing to return to the director's chair, but agreed in exchange for more creative control on Batman Returns. Michael Keaton received a $10 million payday for the sequel. Instead of one villain, this film would have two. Danny DeVito signed on to play the Penguin, and Michelle Pfeiffer would star as Catwoman. In the film, Batman faces off against wealthy industrialist Max Schreck and deformed crime boss Oswald Cobblepot, aka the Penguin, who seek power, influence, and respect regardless of the cost to Gotham. Their plans are complicated by Selina Kyle, Schreck's secretary, who seeks vengeance against Schreck as Catwoman. It cannot be overstated how much of a success the first Batman film was, so much so that other studios were avoiding Batman Returns' release date so as not to compete with the summer's most highly anticipated movie. However, 1992 was a bad year at the box office. Ticket sales were at their lowest in 15 years. Rising film production costs and several box office failures the previous year meant that many studios were struggling financially. On top of this, films releasing during the summer of 1992 would have to compete with audiences staying home and watching the 1992 Summer Olympics. Warner Bros. Launched another powerful marketing campaign for the release of Batman Returns. One of the most high-profile aspects of this campaign was a partnership with McDonald's. McDonald's converted thousands of their restaurants into Gotham City restaurants, offering Batman-themed packaging and toys. When the film was released in theaters, it polarized critics. Keaton's performance as the Dark Knight garnered praise, as did the performances of Michelle Pfeiffer and Danny DeVito. Production design and cinematography were also unanimous highlights. Some critics noted that Batman Returns was a more personal work for Tim Burton due to the creative control given to him by the studio this time around. On the negative side, some critics felt that Batman was once again sidelined in favor of his villains. Others noted that too much emphasis was given to the film's visuals and not enough to the story and characters. The biggest point of criticism at the time was the film's violent, mature, and sexualized content, which many felt was inappropriate for younger audiences. The same younger audience that much of the film's marketing campaign was aimed towards. That McDonald's campaign I mentioned, they got a lot of flack for that, which led McDonald's to end that campaign early. But let's talk box office. Batman Returns opened on June 16, 1992. In its opening weekend, it faced competition from Sister Act, which was in its fourth weekend, and Patriot Games, which was in its third. But Batman landed on top with an opening weekend gross of $47.5 million domestically. Batman Returns had broken the previous Batman film's record for biggest domestic opening weekend ever. Given the opening weekend numbers, it was expected that Batman Returns would follow in its predecessor's footsteps and continue to build momentum throughout its theatrical run. But mixed word of mouth led to some steep drops in the weeks following its release. So let's look at the top grossing films worldwide for 1992. I want you to guess right now where you think Batman Returns ended up. Keep in mind, the first Batman film ended its run as the second highest grossing film of the year worldwide. So do you think Batman Returns was third place? First? Take a guess. Okay, starting from the top, the highest grossing film of 1992 was Aladdin, with $504 million worldwide. In second place was The Bodyguard, with $411 million worldwide. Third place, Home Alone 2, Lost in New York, with $358 million worldwide. Fourth place, Basic Instinct, with $352 million worldwide. Fifth place, Lethal Weapon, with $319 million worldwide. And in sixth place, Batman Returns, with $266 million worldwide, on a budget of $80 million. Though still a financial success, this represented a nearly $150 million decline from the first Batman film. Again, audiences felt the film was too dark at the time, with many parents voicing their concern that the film was just not kid-friendly despite what the marketing campaign had them believe. In recent years, the film has been reappraised and is now considered to be one of the best superhero films ever made, as well as one of the best sequels. Batman Returns actually holds a higher Rotten Tomatoes score than the first Batman film. Now let's head to 1995.
Rusted metal, Batman! Huh? The ground, it's all metal! It's full of holes, you know? Holy!
Oh.
Warner Bros. Was disappointed in Batman Returns' box office decline from its predecessor. For its sequel, they decided to go in a different direction. Although Burton was initially involved in the third Batman film, he and the studio decided to mutually part ways after Batman Returns. Director Joel Schumacher was brought in to replace him with Burton's blessing. Burton would remain as an executive producer on what would become Batman Forever. Michael Keaton was also initially set to return as Batman and approved of Schumacher as Burton's replacement. However, after reading the script and seeing the direction the franchise was going in, Keaton decided to step down, walking away from a $15 million payday. So, given the opportunity, Warner Bros. Decided they wanted to cast a younger Bruce Wayne for Batman Forever. Val Kilmer was eventually cast in the role. The character of Robin was supposed to appear in Batman Returns. It went as far as Marlon Wayans officially signing on to star in Batman Returns and a potential sequel. But when Schumacher took over, he decided to go in a different direction and hired Chris O'Donnell instead. Billy D. Williams, who played Harvey Dent in the first Batman film, had signed on to play Two-Face in any sequels that would include the character, but Schumacher and Warner Brothers again decided to go in another direction and bought Williams out of his contract. The role of Two-Face would go to Tommy Lee Jones, whom Schumacher had just worked with on the film The Client. Jim Carrey was cast as the Riddler, and Nicole Kidman also joined the cast as Dr. Chase Meridian. The film would follow Batman trying to stop Two-Face and the Riddler in their scheme to extract information from all the minds in Gotham City, while adopting an orphaned acrobat named Dick Grayson, and developing feelings for psychologist Dr. Chase Meridian. Schumacher films often get flack for being too campy and silly, but Batman Forever doesn't lean quite as heavily into those elements as the next film would. Robin's whole deal in the movie is that he wants to murder Two-Face for killing his parents. Batman has to teach him that vengeance won't heal his wounds. Batman is going through his own internal struggle. Traumatic memories from shortly after his parents' death mix with nightmares that make him question why he wants to be Batman at all. Sure, this was the film that introduced nipples to the Batsuit, and it certainly lightened the tone like Warner Brothers wanted, but overall it's much more grounded than its sequel. Warner Brothers launched yet another massive marketing campaign. They partnered once again with companies like McDonald's, this time with a promise that the film would be much more kid-friendly than its predecessor. When it was released, critical reception was mixed to negative. Once again, the performances were highlights, but critics were split on whether they liked the lighter tone of this film compared to the Burton movies. But did this creative shift pay off at the box office? Batman Forever opened on June 16, 1995, and grossed $52.8 million in its opening weekend. This once again broke the record for biggest domestic opening weekend ever. Batman was 3 for 3 on that one. It was the first film ever to gross more than $20 million in just one day on its opening day on Friday. The film would go on to gross a worldwide total of $336 million worldwide, $70 million more than Batman Returns. Batman Forever was the 5th highest grossing film worldwide in 1995. It was beaten by Pocahontas in 4th, GoldenEye in 3rd, Toy Story in 2nd, and Die Hard with a Vengeance in 1st. Something to note is that there was not a single film in 1995 that made more than $400 million worldwide. The top 5 movies all ended their run within $30 million of each other. Despite the lackluster critical reception, Warner Brothers viewed this improvement over Batman Returns as an absolute win. Their choice to go with a lighter tone had paid off. Now, on to 1997. With the box office success of Batman Forever, Warner Brothers immediately fast-tracked a sequel with Schumacher returning to direct the 4th film in this motion picture anthology, Batman and Robin.
I want a car. Chicks dig the car.
This is why Superman works alone.
There were allegedly clashes between Kilmer and Schumacher on the set of Batman Forever, so the role of Bruce Wayne would once again be recast. On Kilmer not returning, Joel Schumacher said, quote, "He sort of quit, and we sort of fired him." George Clooney would take over as Batman for this next film. Clooney had recently risen to fame as Dr. Doug Ross on the wildly popular TV show ER. Batman and Robin would add another member to the Bat family in Batgirl, played by Alicia Silverstone, known at the time for starring in the hit film Clueless. For Batman and Robin, more heroes meant more villains. Arnold Schwarzenegger was cast as Mr. Freeze, Uma Thurman was cast as Poison Ivy, who would be aided in the film by an interesting interpretation of Bane. Batman and Robin follows the Caped Crusaders and new addition Batgirl, struggling to keep their partnership together while working to stop Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy from taking over the world. This film is really wacky. However, I truly believe if you look at it as a reboot of the previously mentioned Adam West TV series, it works a little better. It's campy, silly, and way more kid-friendly than any of the 3 previous entries. The critical response to this film was abysmal. It holds a franchise low 12% on Rotten Tomatoes with a consensus that reads, quote, "Joel Schumacher's tongue-in-cheek attitude hits an unbearable limit, resulting in a frantic and mindless movie that's too jokey to care much for. It's considered to be one of the worst superhero films ever made. But hey, audiences seem to like Schumacher's previous Batman film, so maybe this one wasn't dead in the water." Let's talk box office. Batman and Robin opened on June 20th, 1997 to $42.8 million. It would be the first Batman film to not see its opening weekend number increase over its predecessor and the first not to break a domestic opening weekend record. However, this was still a strong enough showing to be number 1 at the box office for its opening weekend, ahead of My Best Friend's Wedding in its first weekend and Con Air in its third. It was also the 3rd biggest opening weekend of the year behind Men in Black and The Lost World Jurassic Park. Fun fact, Batman and Robin would be the biggest opening weekend gross of George Clooney's career until Gravity in 2013. But unfortunately, the film fell hard in its second weekend, dropping a whopping 63%, and it never recovered. Batman and Robin would end its run with a worldwide gross of $238 million worldwide, the lowest total gross of any Burton or Schumacher Batman film. Its poor performance at the box office was credited to its poor critical reception as well as strong competition that summer from Face Off, Hercules, and Men in Black, which all released within a few weeks of Batman and Robin. This would be the first Batman film to not end its run in the top 10 movies of the year worldwide. It would end its run as the 14th highest grossing movie of the year. For context, the top 5 films of 1997 worldwide were Air Force One in 5th place, Tomorrow Never Dies in 4th, Men in Black in 3rd, The Lost World Jurassic Park in 2nd, and Titanic in 1st. The poor critical and commercial performance of Batman and Robin led to the cancellation of a sequel that had been in development titled Batman Unchained. To this day, Clooney apologizes to fans for his involvement in the film.
I always apologize for Batman.
Okay, now what happens when we level the playing field and adjust all of these for inflation? Here we go. First, this is how the films all stack up to each other before inflation. Interesting to see Batman Forever slightly increase over Batman Returns, and then Batman and Robin tank to below Batman Returns' initially disappointing number. Now let's adjust for inflation. I've adjusted both the final worldwide totals and the film's respective budgets. Today, Batman's total gross would have been around $1 billion on a budget of $118 million. Batman Returns' total gross would have been around $581 million on a budget of $174 million. This puts its box office performance into perspective a little better when we see the increase in budget coupled with a decline of almost 50% when compared to its predecessor. Batman Forever's total gross would be around $673 million today on a budget of $200 million. And Batman and Robin's total gross would be around $453 million today on a budget of $238 million. So adjusting for inflation doesn't change their ranking at all. Batman is still at the top with $1 billion, followed by Batman Forever, then Batman Returns, and fittingly, Batman and Robin in last place. There is technically one final entry in this series of films. In 2023, Michael Keaton and George Clooney appeared as their respective versions of Bruce Wayne in The Flash, directed by Andy Muschietti. Keaton's role is more substantial, while Clooney is more of a cameo. Their inclusion in that film, which centers on the Flash dabbling in the multiverse, suggests that Keaton and Clooney's movies take place in separate timelines despite being marketed as taking place in the same universe when they were initially released. The Flash would end its run with a worldwide total of $268 million on a budget of around $200 million. Some quick takeaways. There's been some debate about whether the Tim Burton and Joel Schumacher Batman films are all in the same continuity. On the one hand, the films share actors across all 4 films, such as Michael Gough's Alfred and Pat Hingle's Commissioner Gordon, and the Batsuits share a visual language between Keaton's Batman Returns and Kilmer's Batman Forever. On the other hand, the 2023 film, The Flash, suggests that Michael Keaton's Batman and George Clooney's Batman are separate timelines. When released, the Schumacher films were clearly sequels and were marketed as such. Batman Forever literally begins with the title card, a Tim Burton production, and the first actor who speaks is Michael Gough's Alfred, who appeared in the last 2 films.
Can I persuade you to take a sandwich with you, sir?
I'll get drive-through.
It's all as if to say, this is the same thing as before, don't worry, we're just a little more fun now. But some aspects of the production design and of course the tone were clearly very different, and the Schumacher films don't really reference what happened in the Burton films, so they could also be seen as reboots. The only other franchise I can think of that has done something like this is James Bond. That series has also recast the younger actor to take over the main role in what could be seen as sequels but also reboots. The actors who played M and Q would often overlap between Bonds, which would suggest that the films are all sequels to each other. This happened as recently as Judi Dench playing M for both Pierce Brosnan and Daniel Craig, and yet each new Bond actor's films could still be seen as a kind of reboot as well. Just thought that was worth pointing out. Schumacher's films caused Warner Bros. To pivot to a more realistic, dark, and gritty era of Batman, which has kind of lasted to this day. Christopher Nolan's films, Snyder's films, and most recently Matt Reeves' The Batman have all gone the realistic and greedy route. I do feel like we may have lost some of Batman's more fantastical elements in this transition. Villains hardly ever have superpowers, and if they do, they're nerfed, realistic portrayals of those powers. The content is also arguably way darker now than what had been so heavily criticized in Batman Returns back in 1992. And we also lost Robin. Batman and Robin marked the last time we got to see a live-action Robin at the movies, unless you count whatever Christopher Nolan was doing in The Dark Knight Rises.
You should use your full name. I like that name. Robin. Nice.
And the implied death of Robin in Batman v Superman. It's baffling that such a crucial part of the Batman mythos has simply been missing from his films for almost 30 years now. Oh, also, I recommend checking out the comic book Batman 89, written by the original writer of Batman and Batman Returns. The comic book takes place in an alternate timeline that continues the adventures of Michael Keaton's Batman while ignoring the events of Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. It's super interesting to essentially see how a 3rd or 4th Tim Burton Batman movie could have looked like. So what do you think of the box office performance of Batman, the Motion Picture Anthology? Which film in the series did you like the best? What character or franchise should I do next? Let me know in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Now, back to watching movies.